Bonnie will be discussing, which I'm really interested in the topic, looking into the past. So I will give the stage to Bonnie Holcomb. She was also known as Kabane. Thank you so much. Please, thank you. Have a seat. Should you stand? Yes, we can.
My heart is overflowing. I cannot even express the joy, the confirmation, the thrill of knowing everyone in this room. You know, who in the world has the opportunity to have that pleasure? And I want to thank this organizing committee. I didn't even know this group existed. We had, I heard that they have gone to the Oromo Center and had a meeting there. And the next time that they wanted to have a meeting, the Oromo Center was not there. So they met in other places. They pulled themselves together. They formed this group, and they had me out to dinner with 3 of them, and told me that they would like to have a dinner in my honor. And they handed me an envelope, and I didn't grasp the full impact of that until a couple of days later. You know, I misplaced the envelope. Then I found, and I thought, wow, this is really an amazing thing. I talked to Ebisa, and we talked about who would come and who I would like to also include and have as part of the discussion, have as part of the event. Now, the program says my address. I'm not prepared to give an address per se. This is my dress. But I am very eager and interested to be able to look back over the period of time. I did a bio, and instead of reading the bio to you, Ebisa asked me to go through, and that just looking at the scope of what I have been involved in and why.
You know what? I'm gonna hold the both of them.
I'll
I got you, buddy. Here, go ahead. No, you can.
It's okay. That distracted me. Yeah.
Okay.
And take a look back at personal, academic, and organizational engagements that I have picked up. One of the things that I think is important to know is that the work that I do with the Oromo is not the entirety of my life. And I will come to the end when we're looking forward is that I don't think it should be the entirety of any of your lives. It should be part that is enriched by other engagements, that as we try to tell the Oromo story, we have to be as eager and as interested to listen to others' stories so that we have a nourishment from that, a connection that we build with that, and that we can then go forward with a better perspective and with a richness of a tapestry that is really global. Now, it's been said, and I don't need to repeat, that the time in 1970, in the late 60s actually, up to 70s, that I became interested in the Oromo came because my dad, sitting over here, who prayed so eloquently earlier, was a board member of the Christian Missionary Fellowship, which is part of the Christian Church of Christ. It's the Reformed, it's part of the Reformed movement of Protestantism. And they had a series of living link missionaries who, kind of like in the Poisonwood Bible, got abandoned in the field, and the pastor would change and missionaries would not have support. So this group built a structure and did training and called missionaries, and they would come to our house and sit at the table with us and talk to us about their challenges. And the one I remember was a man named Mont Smith, whose brother actually conducted Bill's and my wedding ceremony. So a close friend of the family. They'd gone to Bible college together. And he said, he was talking about their work there, and it occurred to me that they didn't speak the language of the local people. And he said, well, we are required to speak in the national language, to learn the national language, to hire people who speak the national language. And I said, what about the heart language of the people? Do you know that? Do you learn that? And they said, no, we don't. It's hard enough to learn Amharic. So I began to question them about what they really did know about the people that they were sent to convert. And it triggered in my mind as a high school student interested in starting to read about the world and to know more, that there was something wrong with this picture. Now, I subsequently have learned that the Haile Selassie regime did place these restrictions on incoming missionaries, that there was a necessary requirement to learn Amharic and to be part of the expansion of the government out into the areas where they were building airstrips and clinics and houses and what have you. So as I began to criticize what they were doing, he said to me, if you're interested in that kind of approach, you should go into anthropology. Okay, so that planted the seed in my mind. So I did. When I went to college, I went into anthropology. I majored in anthropology. I had been raised with my mother has a college degree. My father had a college degree and took our family when he went out to get his MA, his BD degree. We studied scripture. We went to church every Sunday. We deeply discussed the issues of principle and the impact on action. Faith without works is dead. What do you do with all these texts that you have? How does it impact and change your behavior? There was a lot of deep discussion of the meaning, the symbolism, and the contextualization of the scriptures. And so when I began to be interested in anthropology, studying anthropology, I went to Bryn Mawr College. Jane Friedman was my best friend from college days, was there, and I was very much involved, and it was I was a child of the '60s, and so is Bill, and probably some others here. Not quite there yet with my friends. But we were questioning. We thought the world was going to, the whole system was going to collapse. We could not imagine how we could continue the way we were going with the Vietnam War and the resistance that was coming and the society being torn apart. We took a hard look at the military-industrial complex. We were actually resisting so much, and I became involved. I was elected as the president of the Self-Government Association. In a Quaker college, that means you have rights. So we actually wanted to shut down the university and go out and campaign in Philadelphia to bring down Nixon and oppose his invasion of Cambodia, which we did. And later on, many years later, the treasurer of the University of Bryn Mawr College saw me and said, "Oh, Bonnie, we have never gotten some of the payments from those parents who were so upset when the kids left and went into the city and never finished their exams." But we did make an impact, and so we were really passionate, and we were frustrated with the system that we had. So in that context, I won a prize to go study in Africa, and I did go. I decided to go take these missionaries up on their offer. They invited me there. And I actually went to Makerere University in Uganda. I landed in Kenya after I said goodbye forever to Bill. And because I couldn't imagine how I could do what I wanted to do with, and be married at the same time. So I landed there and registered at Makerere University when Idi Amin was expelling all of the Indian citizens and residents out of Uganda, if anybody remembers that period of history. And I remember I was at an event where Idi Amin was actually invested as the chancellor of the university. This man who had no education was very proud, though, to wear the robes, and they came only to his knees. They came to everybody else's feet, ankles. And he was there, and the world was changing. So when I went, arriving in Finfinne in September of 1971, went to Horoguduru in October of 1971, the prettiest time of the year. Flew out in a little missionary aviation fellowship plane and landed down in an airstrip that had been made in the region by locally hired people, and began to learn. I had been given an assignment. I was invited as an intern, given an assignment to see, is it possible to indigenize the church into local areas of what they were calling the Gadaa territories. That question intrigued me, and I began to look at the culture and engage with people on that basis, on the basis of what are the deep beliefs, what are the what is the understanding. As I learned the language, I had a very talented person with me who was from Dembidolo. His name is Gudeta Nagari, and we would talk through, we would tape people's discussions and talk through. And I think my husband asked me, even recently when we were talking about this, what is it that put that hook so deep into your soul when you were there working with the Oromo? And I think it happened because I was ready to look for alternatives. I thought that the deep study of principles actually was important for an understanding action. And especially at one time when I took on a project to translate the parables of Jesus' words from the New Testament into the Oromo language, and I had learned Greek at Bryn Mawr, so I did directly from Greek into Afan Oromo. And at one point, I must tell you all, I actually could speak Afan Oromo at one time and conduct myself in that language, but I have lost that capacity, for which I'm very sorry. I speak English with everybody. Their English is better than mine. But in that time, I was studying and looking at these issues, these eternal truths, and they matched in so many ways Oromo principles, Oromo values. I looked deeply at the symbolism. I looked at how everybody who's walking around Oromia is carrying this legacy of this fantastic language and of this tradition of sacred knowledge, of which they were not particularly aware. It was guiding their behavior. It was guiding the way they changed, that they educated their children. It was shaping their lives in ways of which they were not conscious. But it was something that resonated deeply with me, that there was a lot, that there was such a value there. There was enormous earth care message. There was social justice. There was balance. And recently, when I was working with Isgail Gabissa on a paper on the issue of conversion, we got down to this kind of basic wiring, the topic of when you're there dealing with the basic principles, what is it that translates from the scriptures to what the Oromo understand? And when you're looking at how Onesimus actually translated the Bible, he is actually bringing concepts into the Oromo language, some of which are much more appropriate than English. There's much greater richness in the Oromo concept of arara than there is English concept of reconciliation, because the Oromos really know what reconciliation is. They believe that the forces in the universe must stay in balance. They believe that peace is a constant vigilance of keeping that balance. It's not grounded in a notion of evil. It's grounded in a notion of things getting out of whack. And if you fix it, and if you understand it and go deeply enough to find the forces, you can balance that. That is very powerful, and it was very meaningful to me. And the idea that people have, that human beings have a place in the world that's not above other resources, animals and trees and pollinators. There are living resources, life-giving resources that have to be protected. And I learned these in very profound ways. I watched some kids trying to chase the baboons away from the crops. And the baboons would come and the kids would chase them away. And I would say, just just kill the baboons, for goodness sakes, they're going to eat all your food. And they were just horrified. Kill the baboons, or what? You know, and they pushed back really hard and said, we are not, this has been confirmed later, but in many of my studies, but this was my first encounter with this. We are not above the baboons. We are not above the bees and the trees and the water. We have to find our place. They are doing what they need for life. We do what we need for life. And then we sustain over time what is going to keep future generations alive. This is a vignette, but I had these kind of encounters. One, because I was trying to ask this question of, can you indigenize the church? I think you can indigenize the church much more. If the church is indigenous, it's much closer in the Middle East. It's much closer in terms of climate and culture than Europe and America and Australia. It was like a no-brainer for me. It's just a matter of what kind of incrustations have been brought. But when we're actually dealing with the translation of key concepts, and you understand those, there's an enormous flow of interfaith, and can be of interfaith understanding in these areas. So that's the hook. That was the hook that got me. And the other issue is there was nobody else out there asking these questions. The missionaries had their job to do, and they were sealed off from the people almost by the language, the restrictions they had. I mean, they went with the goodness of their heart, and some of them did horrible things, which, alienated me for a long time. In terms of thinking that the Oda tree should be cut down because it was, Satan worship or something. But it was basically that they were cut off. Then the Peace Corps people had learned Amharic in Los Angeles before they even arrived in Ethiopia. So when they went out, there were very few of them were learning the language. So when I came home, I planned to go back and do a greater study. I wanted to do a systems analysis, and had come to the conclusion that the Oromo were colonized, and that there was a colonial system coming in. The missionaries had to play this intermediate role. The Oromos had their own system that needed to be fully, richly discussed. And I was looking forward to doing a full-blown study. And then, of course, the Derg came into power. And when the Mengistu took over, the changes that were carried out in 1974, it wasn't possible to go back. They wouldn't allow imperialist researchers into the country. And I had to decide at that point, what am I going to do? I'd gone ahead, I'd finished my PhD studies, my coursework, my proposal was approved, I'd done everything except this research. And I was offered the chance to do a PhD in philosophy of science, because I'd written a paper that got some recognition, and finally decided at the time in late 70s, that I would rather stay to work with the Oromo issue, which really touched me, than to move into something that would give me a degree and put me in a university but would not satisfy me. That was made possible because of my decision to collaborate with Sisay Ibsa. I had, as Bill said, I returned to the United States. I was looking, when we came to DC, looking for people who would actually speak Afan Oromo with me and talk about some of these issues that deeply concerned me, and talk about what's happening to the people under the Derg. And Lube said that I called Sisay, but actually he called me. The woman I met, who was a waitress in the pizza place down on Nim Street, said, yes, I know. I had given my number to probably 12 Ethiopians. And they said, oh yeah, we know people who speak Oromo. Nothing. Galinya, nothing. So finally, Sisay called, And we started speaking. We had a entire conversation in Afan Oromo. And he had just been basically expelled from, or I don't know whether ultimately voluntarily withdrew or expelled from Isuna, where he and Lube and other Oromos had come to the conclusion that the Oromos was a colonial situation, that the Oromos were colonized. This was an aberrant type, but it was they had gone through the Eritrean case, they had championed the Eritreans, and he had come to this conclusion. He had sacrificed for it. They'd written letters to Isuna. They were basically pariahs for thinking this. And then he calls up an American woman, speaking to him in Afan Oromo, who says, "I think the Oromos are colonized." And he said, "What? Where does this come from in my life? How is it that we reach this conclusion from such different positions?" So we met, and we had long discussions. He'd had a lot of training in Marxism. I'd had university exposure to Marxism. I'd had training in theology. He, had all these reasons why he shouldn't look into theology. But we decided that we had a similar goal, and that was to work to address this Oromo issue in a way that was sophisticated, respectful, and ultimately would wake up a sleeping giant. And that's what we set out to do. So looking back, and somebody needs to give me time.
Yes.
Looking back.
About 3 minutes.
Okay, looking back then, the point that I would make is that in those days, I met many of you in this room. I did meet with the Union of Oromo Students in North America for long, endless Sunday meetings from morning till night. And I stayed a part of that discussion until 1985, when the Oromo students in North America voted not to allow non-Oromos to be part of them. So, the coincidence of that timing was, was important to deciding where and how to move. That was 84. So I think if I have to look back, I think that the kind of commitment that I made, I don't see as being unusual. I think if other people had had the opportunity to encounter real Oromuma, if they had had an opportunity to visit, which they were not, there was nobody who was getting into Oromia allowed to do the kind of thing I did, drink deeply, that they would have come to love, appreciate, engage, challenge, and be part of and partners with Oromos. But I was the only one that was able or chose to do that. And Oromos had been cut off in so many ways. One, because of the oppression that they feel, because of overt, silencing, and because they stay together. They're meeting together. They're not out telling their story with others. That there haven't been as many friends. The Oromos need friends, and the Oromos need to be friends to others. And I think that there have been. It's almost unspeakable, the kind of blackout, of silencing that there has been allowed to shut down all things Oromo. And I would just say that one of the reasons that I started writing The Kindling Point, that I started not being as obnoxious in meetings like Quo Vadis Ethiopia or the African Studies Association, is because I got a call one day from Gunnar Hasselblad. He had been speaking out about the Oromo case, and he had embarrassed an Ethiopian official. And the Derg sent a bomb squad, assassin squad, to Germany, went to his Bible bookstore, he was a missionary, pulled out a concordance and was built, and they were building a bomb inside it when it blew up in their faces and blew off the side of the Hotel du Mas in Berlin. And the instructions were available, and when they saw what happened, one of the men was killed, one was maimed. They said that he was targeted to be assassinated because of what he had been saying about the Oromos. So he called me up while he still had German security with him and said, "Bonnie, I haven't spoken up as much as you have. You have got to lie low. You have got to stop being a target. You have got to find another way to work. This is a dangerous situation." So when we then took that into account, we decided to write in a pen name, using a Lenin-esque approach, creating the character and trying to reach out to agitate from behind, from low profile. And then the partnership from then on was Sisai was in front and I was behind, and that was agreed. So I'll give up my time now. I could go on all night, of course.
You'll have another chance.
But and we'll look forward. We'll look forward too. But that looking back is a. I would like to clarify that collaboration that I chose to make with Seaside instead of taking a position in the university ended up being something that was built on trust, which we have to work really hard to sustain, and that it ended up being something that was a mutual. We had reached a mutual point from different starting points. So it was a collaboration that actually worked until he died in 2005. We miss him. His spirit is in this room. His spirit brought these people together. And he deserves our recognition as well, and I guess he's going to get it. So thank you so much.
Thank you very much. Thank you. Thank you. That was a wonderful speech. Please give her a hand. And it's a pleasure working on this project. Thank you very much. If you like. And the reason we're here, congratulations. Braden recently got married to Molly Silverman and Braden Silverman. Please give them a welcome to the nice Oromo community. Give them a hand. And I would like to invite them